Guys. Today we're going to talk about political and economic systems. We're doing this first because as we go through each of these units now, we're going to be talking about different countries and their governments and their economies and that. So I think it's important for you to have kind of a background knowledge of what's going on, different types of governments and economic systems. So here we go. Okay, so governments can fall into three categories. Okay, so they could be unitary, confederal, or federal. Okay, so a unitary government is where the federal government holds all the authority and power. Okay, so there's no levels of government like we have. It's just they control everything. And then there's a confederal government, and that's where the local governments hold most of the power. Okay, so when we were originally under our original constitution, we were what was considered a confederacy. Okay, and this is what the South, when they seceded from the North after the or during the Civil War, I guess, when that happened, they were a confederacy. Okay, so that's where the states basically held all the power and then let the central government do a few things. Okay, but we actually have a federal government. So this is where the local governments and the federal government share power and responsibility. So we have three different levels of authority in our government. So we got local, state, and then the national or the federal government. And they all have their roles and responsibilities. So countries can have a variety of political systems. So another way governments are categorized is by who's in charge. Okay, so an autocracy is there's one person in charge, and an oligarchy there's a small group of people, and a theocracy the religion is in charge, so usually the priests of that are in charge, and then in the democracy the people are in charge. Okay, so in an autocracy, the ruler inherits the throne by birth, by military power, however they inherit it, but they hold all the power. Okay, citizens do not have a right to decide on laws. Like we do, we get to vote people in to help create policy and laws, and in autocratic systems of government, that doesn't happen. So, for example, a monarchy would be an example of this. Dictatorship or fascist government. And so countries that would be examples of this would be like Jordan. You can see the King of Jordan right here, King Abdullah. Nazi Germany, they were fascist, or Italy during World War, pre-World War II and into World War II, they were fascist. And then North Korea would be an example of a communist dictatorship. Okay, so Kim Jong-un is the leader of North Korea. So how do dictators keep power? So they're just one guy. So what are some tactics that they use to do that? So dictators can use their armies to arrest or to attack protesters. They often work in fear. Okay, they often promise a better life, especially for the poor. Okay, so this is usually how they get into power: is they appeal to the poor and they get into power, and then they use fear in order to maintain that power. And so many countries have never had democracy. A lot of these countries haven't. And so they're just used to having dictators. And so in a lot of cases, the people rally behind somebody who they think has their best interests at heart. Now, some dictators will get support from other countries, like, for example, when Fidel Castro of Cuba, when he came into power, the Soviet Union supported him. Okay, because he was communist, they were communist. They wanted, and not only that, they were really close. Cuba's really close to the United States, and so the Soviet Union had a lot of interest in Cuba becoming communist. An oligarchy. So in an oligarchy, there's a small group of people who hold or share power, and they usually gain power through wealth, through military power, or through social status. But citizens, once again, have little to no say in the government. So, for example, in like communist China, so in communism, communist China is technically an oligarchy because the Communist Party rules. The military junta that's in Thailand, those are two examples. Okay, so or in Myanmar, there was a military group that controlled it. There's a big debate on whether Myanmar is Burma or how they recognize that. But those would be examples of an oligarchy where there's a few people who rule, but not everybody. And then in theocracy, this is where religion is the source of power. Usually, we see this in an oligarchy, but usually the ruler is believed to be divinely inspired. So we're talking about like historically, like ancient Egypt, the pharaohs were said to be the embodiment of Horus. Okay, so they were divinely inspired. In theocracies, usually citizens do not have a right to decide laws. But most of the countries that would be theocracies, a lot of them are Islamic countries. So like Iran, for example, but also like Vatican City. Okay, so Vatican City is ruled by the Catholic Church and the Pope in particular. So those would be different examples of theocracy today. And then democracy. So this is where the leaders rule with the consent of the people. So citizens have a say in the laws and the politics. Now there's two different types of democracy. There's direct democracy or there's representative democracy. So we actually live in a representative democracy or a republic. But in a direct democracy, everybody votes on everything. Okay, so if there's a law that comes up, every citizen gets a vote. Okay, now we have 330 million people in this country. That's not a possibility for us. Okay, so we have a representative democracy. So what we do is we vote for people who we like, who we think will make good decisions, and we vote for them to make those decisions. Now, there are instances, like whenever there's a referendum, that would be an example of using direct democracy in this country. So if, like the school, for example, wants to build a new, football field, then they would need money to do that. They would have to pass a referendum, and then the people who are being taxed would say yes or no to that. Okay, so countries that would be examples of democracies: the United States, obviously, we're a federal republic, and then England. They do still have a monarchy, but they have a constitutional republic or a constitutional monarchy. So they do elect leaders, but they also have the Queen, who also kind of influences the government. So geography and government. So there's different types of boundaries that we have when we are separating states or separating countries. So there's natural boundaries. Okay, so these are boundaries that follow physical geographic forms. So if you look at this map of the United States, you could see where the Mississippi River goes because it goes right along the border of Illinois and Missouri, right here. Okay, you can see where it goes all the way down until it hits the Gulf of Mexico there. And then there's cultural boundaries. Cultural boundaries would separate areas that have different cultural differences, like language or religion. An example of this might be this area right here of Missouri. See how it kind of jets out there? Some of this was supposed to go to Kansas, but Kansas didn't recognize these people here, so Missouri took them. Same thing happened right here with the Boot Heel and with Arkansas and Missouri. Okay, and then the last is geometric boundaries. So these are usually just straight lines that are just drawn with very little consideration of geography of culture. So you can see like Colorado, just a square. Okay, Wyoming is a square. Okay, so these would be examples of geometric boundaries. Moving on to economics. So economics is the study of how goods and services are produced, distributed, and consumed. So the people who make these goods or services are called the producers, and then the people who buy them are the consumers. Okay, so now you can be both within this country. So you can be a producer, and you do that when you go to your work. Okay, you produce some kind of good or service. Like right now, I'm literally working, I'm literally producing a service to educate you about economics. Okay, and then you are the consumer and you are taking that in. Okay, so there's different types of economy. So in a traditional economy, these are more when you're talking like Middle Ages, early civilizations. Okay. But this is where habit and custom determines the rules for all economic activity. So people would find food for themselves and trade needed goods. There were very few companies or governments involved, but this system is found among herders or small farmers. This is not a very common system anymore. Okay. Next type of economy is a market economy. Okay, so this is where the people own companies and then decide what to produce in order to make customers happy. So we sometimes call this capitalism or the free enterprise system, but the idea is that it's the company's job to make as much money as it can, and so it's going to produce as many goods as it can that the people want to buy. Okay, so people don't want to buy low quality goods. Producing low quality goods is not going to be good enough. Okay, they have to meet the demand. And so capitalism is the private ownership of business and property functioning to make a profit. Okay, that is the goal of capitalism, is to make a profit. And then the free market, in the free market, prices are set by businesses, by supply and demand, competition, without government interference. So this is known as what's called laissez-faire. Okay, when the government does not get involved at all in the economy. Now, most economies that we see are actually mixed market economies. So our government, for example, does have some say in how businesses are run. It does get involved in the economy in different ways, like tariffs and negotiating free trade agreements and things like that. So we have what is known as a mixed market economy. Now, a command economy is the exact opposite of a free enterprise system. So in a free enterprise system, if I want to buy something and I have enough money to do it, I can buy something. But in a command economy, like socialism or communism, the government dictates what you can get, okay? How things are made. They make all the economic decisions. So the government owns or directs the means of production. So that means land, labor, capital, managers. The government controls all of that. And then the government makes the economic decisions about what is made, how it's made, and then who gets to buy it. Okay, so basically in socialist and communist economies, the government gets to decide what you have. Okay, now the goal of this is to keep everybody equal. Okay, be equal, not equal opportunity, equal outcome. So in socialism, the government runs some industries such as oil and then uses the profits to pay for healthcare, education, etc. So for example, in Venezuela, Venezuela used to be one of the richest countries. It was the richest country in South America, but one of the richest countries in the world because it just has all kinds, it's still to this day, has tons and tons of oil reserves. And the government took over the oil companies, and then they used all the profit from the oil to provide free healthcare and education. And while that sounds good, what ended up happening was they eventually they drove the prices too low in Venezuela. It's cheaper to go get a gallon of gas than it is to buy a bottle of water there. Okay, or to, it's like almost free practically to get gas there. But in Venezuela, the government has taken over so much of the economy that all the industries are pretty much gone, and people are basically working out of their own homes and things like that. And the economy has really tanked. But in communism, the government runs all the industries. So this is the difference between socialism and communism. In communism, the government owns all the industries. They own all the property. They set all the wages and the prices, and people just have to do as they're told. So for example, North Korea. North Korea owns everything. Okay, the government owns everything. Okay? So communism versus capitalism. So capitalism pros. Workers have a reason to work. You want to make money? You work hard, you start your own business, there's incentive to work. Businesses can grow and advance with profit as a motivator, and you get better products, cheaper prices, more goods, and many more choices. And the biggest difference between capitalism and communism is with capitalism, you think of the economy as a pie, and everyone's a slice of the pie. Well, the thing is, in capitalism, you can always make more pies. In communism, there's just the one pie. and everybody gets their own little sliver. So in communism, you get equal outcomes for everybody except for government officials. So what ends up happening is, like in China, for example, people who are well connected are very wealthy, but everybody else is very, very poor. Okay, so everybody is equally poor, except for the government officials. And that's the difference. Capitalism, everybody has an opportunity to be wealthy. It doesn't matter who you are. As long as you're willing to work for it, you can be wealthy. Which is why so many people are willing to defend capitalism, because it works. It's brought the global poverty rate down to less than 5%. Communism didn't do that. Capitalism did. Okay? So that's it for today. Don't forget to do your processor. Okay? Your processor is 10 test questions, so make sure you do 5 multiple choice and you answer all 10 questions.